We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelek Chovav. That's volume 26. We're doing now the first parsha, first sicha for the parshas Pekudai. And we're learning this sicha Leilu Nishmas Harav Levi Yitzchok ben Rabbi Chaim Tzvi, who's was a dedicated shliach of the Rebbe, and he was taken at a young age. And we're learning Leilu Nishmasei to benefit his soul. Tei Nishmasei Tzurur B'Tzurur Chaim. This sicha is a Rashi sicha, really. The Rebbe is explaining. Rashi seems to contradict himself. The same Rashi, how we interpret the pasuk, the very first pasuk of the parsha. The parsha begins with Eile Pekudai Hamishkon, Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe, and we'll see the Mefarshim learn it two ways, and Rashi seems to learn like both of them. And the Rebbe is going to explain how it means. He's going to try one explanation, but the Rebbe is going to eventually tell us that it's a totally different. The Rebbe brings in a whole different insight into this whole idea over here, that Rashi was bothered by the word Eila. Why does it say Eila over here? And we know Eila this as opposed to the what was written before, as the Rebbe will continue. But we'll go step by step, and let's look inside, and we'll start with Aleph. So first the Rebbe brings down the verse and says, in the Pirush HaPosuk, in the meaning of the verse, Eile Pekudei HaMishkon Goimer. So these are the Pekudei HaMishkon. What does it mean, the word Pekudei HaMishkon? Pekudei can either mean, as we will see, the counting, the way how the Mishkan was made of from all the different contributions. So it was the Pekudim. It's basically doing an accounting. This is the accounting of the Mishkan. Or Pekudei can also mean the appointment, the one who was in charge, like a pakid, somebody who was in charge. So the pasuk, we'll see there's two perushim over here. Eila Pekudei Mishkan Goimer. Let's leave it. Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe. So the counting or the appointment was done by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was in charge, and he gave it. Who did the actual? Wasn't Moshe himself? It was by Moshe's instruction. But this was Avodas HaLevi. This was the work of the Levi. The Kahanim, they did the Karbones, they did the other work, but the Leviim, they did this work, and this was Biyad Isomer Goimer. Isomer was one of the sons. They divided the of Levi. So they had the various different they had Aaron had four sons, Nadav and Avihu. They both passed away. Then it was left with Eleazar and Isomer. So Isomer took charge of the various different avodas. So he was the one that Biad Isomer he was in charge. That's the pasuk. Isfaran aplukte in mefarshim. So there is a disagreement in the commentators. The commentators disagree. What is the exact meaning over here? What is the Pekudei HaMishkan means? In the previous parsha, the pasuk talked about how they constructed and they did the menorah, they did the shulchan, everything. There needed to be somebody in charge of everything that was going on. So one pshat says that Eila Pekudei, this pasuk is saying, this is the position, the Pekudei, their job of the Mishkan, and this was Moshe in the summer. They were the Pekudei. So Eid Pirush, look inside, is as Eila Pekudei HaMishkan, when it says these are the Pekud of the Mishkan. But Tzitzich, this refers to if der Meise HaMishkan was steht in der Frier Dike Sedra. This refers to the act of the Mishkan. And that is written in the previous Sedra. The previous Sedra, it says how they constructed everything. And in Parshas Vayakil, that's in the portion of Vayakil, Vu es wird erzählt beprotius. Over there, it's related in details, all the specifics. Wegen Asiyas Hamishkan Vekelo. Over there, in the previous Parshas Vayakil, it tells you specifically all the details about the construction, the making of the Mishkan Vekelo. Und lifi according to this, is der Teich von Pekudai Hamishkan. So what does it mean when it says Pekudai Hamishkan? What does it mean Pekudai Hamishkan Gomer? Avodas Halavim Gomer. What does it mean the Pekud Mishkan and the service of the Levim? Von Loshen Minui Vetafki. The word Pekudai means appointment and position and job. That was their job. Eile Pekudai Hamishkan. What was the job of construction? Who was in charge of all the making and the doing of the Mishkan? So what does it mean? Eilev Kuzainen, the Pekudei as der Mishkan V'Kelov, that the Mishkan and its vessels are Zainen, the Pekudei Avodas Halavim, Shepokda Moshe B'Yadi Somer. This is the job, this is the appointment. And the job of the Levim, that's Avodas HaLevim, the appointment for the work of the Levim, they were instructed, Moshe instructed them, that means Alpi Moshe, B'Yadi Somer, Moshe instructed them that the work is done by his summer. Now, we learned before about the Maise HaMishkan. We learned what they did, but we didn't learn about that Isomer was in charge and doing that work. So he says, Uvin der Zelt in Chumash Bamidbar, but in the Chumash Bamidbar it relates later on as the Levim seinen Nismane geworden, that the Levim were appointed auf zu tragen der Mishkan V'Kelov. They were carried the Mishkan V'Kelov while the Yidden were journeying in the desert. So the Mishkan and the Kalim, they were taken apart and they were carried and then they put together. Who did that job? It was done by the Levim. So our pasuk here is telling us that this that you learned before about the Mishkan and the various different Kalim that were in part of the Mishkan, I want you to know, Eila Pekudei, these are the ones who were appointed and they were commanded. Asher Pukad, the word B'Yad Moshe Rabbeinu, who instructed them that this should be the job of the Levim, as we said, B'Yad Somer. So, just to point out, the second Asher Pukad here means instructed. The Pekudei means who were appointed. These are the appointment of the Mishkan was Isomer, the Avodas the Levim, who in charge was Isomer of the Levim, who instructed that the one to be in charge of the Mishkan was Api Moshe. That was Moshe. That's one pshat. Beis, what is the second pshat? The second pshat says no, Pekudei doesn't mean appointment. Pekudei means this is the accounting. The accounting, it's talking about what the parasha talks about later on. The portion later on tells what did they do with the money, what they did with the silver, what they did with the gold, what they did with the copper. We will see. It doesn't actually say what they did with everything. But in concept, the word Pekudei means these are the numbers and these are the accounting for all the gifts that the Jewish people brought before. Base, the second interpretation. First interpretation, Pekudei means appointment. Here is Eila Pekudei HaMishkan, the accountant, meint Dam Cheshbon. It means the accounting. Funem Zov, Kesef Unecheshus, the gold, the silver, the copper. Fun Nidvas HaMishkan, of the gifts of the Mishkan. Was wird weiter ausgerechnet in unser Sedra, which is further enumerated in our Sedra later on. So either Pekudai talks about the appointment about what was discussed in the previous parsha, or it means the accounting with what is being counted in our Sedra. Ulefizeh, and according to this, is Pekudei Meloshon Minyan Vecheshbon. Here, Pekudei comes from the language of number and accounting. This is the accounting. These are the numbers. Und der Pirush von Avodas Halevi Biyadi Somer. So, what does it mean that Avodas Halevi Biyadi Somer? Now, who was in charge to count? Who was in charge to make the cheshbon? Aziz Somer. Biyadi Somer is given there. He was the one, their memune. He was the one appointed, or Gabai. He was the Gabai. He was the treasurer. He was the one who was in charge of them Zov, Kesav, and Echayshis. On this gold, silver, and copper, it was he who was in charge. Midem Hill for the Levim. It was all the Levim, the Pasuk says. It's Avodas HaLevim. But Biyadi Somer was the main treasurer, and he took care of it. That means Pekudei Hamishkon, that is Somer took care of it. The problem is Rashi seems to say like both types. The Farshim say either one. Rashi sort of mixes the two pshatim together. And that's very surprising. Men advar pella, we find something surprising in Pirush Rashi, of the Posik, and Rashi on this verse. Wo sein Pirush auf den ersten Teil Posik, Rashi's commentary on the first part of the Posik, is l'chayre bistira, seemingly looks that it contradicts to sein Pirush auf den zweiten Teil Posik, to his commentary on the second part of the Posik. Rashi explains the first part of the Posik and the second part of the Posik, and it seems like he's contradicting. In the first part of the Posik, Rashi explains like it means the accounting, the Eila Pekudei. This is the numbers, explain the numbers. And then later on, when it says Al Biyadi Somer, Rashi says, seems like Rashi's talking about the appointment, who was in charge on the Mishkan, on the Kalim, in charge. Rashi seems to combine both. Let's look inside. Eila Pekudei. On the word Eila Pekudei, Taich Rashi, so Rashi says, Beparsha zu nimnu kol mishkole nidvas hamishkon chulu. In this portion, meaning following from this pasuk in Vayakel, are counted all the weights, the mishkol, those they were weighing the kesef, the zov, they were weighed. Nidvas hamishkan, we'll see the Rebbe will make in the initial Torah's emphasis of this as well. The nidvas hamishkan. So this were counted all the weights of the nidvas hamishkan, which means what? That we're counting over here. Das haste, which means Rashi is learning. This is the accounting, the numbers, the sum, the cheshbon. This haste the pshat. From Pekudai Mishkan, what does it mean? This is the Pekudai Mishkan. Is der Cheshbon von Nitvas HaMishkan. That would mean this is the accounting of the gifts of the Mishkan. Ubemele batzit sich das nicht zu Parsha V'Yakel. Therefore, this does not reference Parsha V'Yakel. Not saying Eila, what we learned before. This is only going in the future. Nor zu them, as Rashi teaches out, to them was kommt weiter be Parsha Zu, what comes later in the Parsha. That's what Rashi says. Be Parsha Zu nimlu kol mishkolei nitvas hamishkon. In this Parsha, here it counted because Pekudei is the counting, and in this Parsha we have all the accounting. That's the first part of the Rashi. Aber if Avodas HaLevi is Rashi Mefarish. But when it says Avodas HaLevi, Rashi explains Pekudei HaMishkon V'Kelov Hi Avoda HaMesura LaLeviim B'Midbar. Rashi says what it was the Pekudai Mishkan. Rashi says the Kalov, the appointment. Here it seems the appointment for the Mishkan and the Kalim is a work Hamesura that was given over La Levim Bamidbar, that was given over to the Levim in the desert. They were appointed to do the Loses Ulahoided, to carry and to lower, Ulahakim, and then to raise. Ish Lemasoy, every person for their load, Hamufked Olov, which was appointed. We had some people were carrying the different sons, the Gershon, Kosu, Merari, they were carrying uh, the different parts of the Mishkan. Some were carrying the Mishkan, some were carrying the Kalim, some were carrying the covers. So ish lemasoy hamufkadalov, that they were appointed. Says in Parshas Nosei. So Rashi says, what is the Pekudai over here? Pekudai, according to Rashi, right now means appointment. Vahainu, that means as Pekudai hamishkan v'kelov, that when we say the appointed Mishkan Kelov meant nicht wie dem weiterdicke Cheshbon von Nidus and Mishkan Chulu. It doesn't mean the Cheshbon that we learn later on of Nidus and Mishkan, the calculation, nor Minui, nor the Minui. This is talking about the appointment of Mishkan. We're talking about the appointment for the Mishkan to carry, to bring down, to raise, etc. So this is going on the previous pasuk. Rashi seems to contradict himself. Rashi, what is the meaning of Pekudai? Does Pekudai meaning the numbers, as Rashi says, or does Pekudai mean the appointment? Rashi starts off by saying that Pekudai means the numbers, as was encountered in this parsha, and then he says the Pekudai Mishkan means the appointment that the Leviim had, that they went and they brought the Mishkan. So basically, what the Rebbe said over here in this ois was that there is two possibilities to teach Eile Pekudai Mishkan. Either it goes on the past, that the appointments, Pekudai means appointments, and it's talking about the structure of the Mishkan V'Kelov, or Eile Pekudai goes on the future. This is the numbers, the counting of how they use the money that the people brought for gifts, which the Pasuk enumerates later on. Rashi seems to combine both Pirushim. In the first Rashi, Eile Pekudai, Rashi seems to say clearly we're talking about the numbers in this parsha, which is Vaiter. Pekudai means number. And then Rashi goes on, but by Pekudai, Rashi says that we're talking about what the previous parsha, that who carried and who lowered, that this was the Alevim. So how are we going to reconcile this Rashi? So this is what the Rebbe has. The Rebbe is going to try to answer this now, but the Rebbe is not going to accept this answer until the Rebbe is going to come up with his chiddush, as we're going to see shortly. Base base, the Rebbe tries to answer that perhaps since in the pasuk talks about the number, the accounting of the money, then it talks about the Bigdei Kahuna, and then the pasuk goes ahead and talks also about the various kalim that they brought. So the Rebbe says this numbers Eile Pekudai that Rashi teaches. If you look closely in the Rashi says the numbers means how many shkolim, the amount mishkele nived, the mishkolim, the money, the monetary. But also Rashi says also all the kalim that they used, they were counted as well. So maybe because they were counted, and this Pekudai means the counting of the shekolim, and it also means the counting of the kalim. So that means that this was an appointment also to take care of the kalim, if you're counting the kalim. So this would answer why Rashi can teach, even though Rashi says numbered Pekudai means the amounts, but it also refers to the number of kalim, and that involves already the avodah of biadi somer de levim into carrying the midbar. So that would answer the contradiction. But the Rebbe says, why does Rashi have to get involved in that? The pekude means also the kalim, which is later on in the parsha, not right away. Why doesn't he just learn that the pekude means the numbers, the money, how the money was allocated for the different kalim, and that was appointed was Isamar ben Aaron HaKohen. Why do we have to talk about the kalim and the midbar and the who was in charge? Let's look inside base. Kemen das verantworten Leuten Museum vom Pirush Rashi of Elib Kudei. Seems like we can answer this based according to the end of Rashi on Elib Kude. So Rashi says, Nimnu kol mishkele nidvas mishkan hulu, that they counted all the weights of the gifts of the Mishkan, the money that came in hulu. And then Rashi adds, Venimnu kol kelov l'chol avedose. And they also counted all the vessels of the Mishkan, and that was needed for all of the work that they did in the Mishkan. There's haste, which means as mit Pekude Mishkan, when it says counting of the Mishkan, werd gemeint nicht nur der Cheshbon von Nidvas Mishkan. Doesn't mean only when the counting of the Mishkan doesn't just talk about the accounting from the gifts that were people gifted for the Mishkan. Nor euch der Minyan von Kol Kelev L'chol Avedose, also the counting of all the vessels that were needed for all the work of the Mishkan. Welche werden ausgerechnet weiter in der Sedra, which are detailed, enumerated later on in the Sedra. Noch ein Sipur wegen Asiyas Bigdei Kehuna, after the story about making of the Kehuna. So we talk about the numbers that came in from the gifts. Then we talk about the making of the Gilvig de Kuna. The Torah says, Mishkan, as a Mishkan al Moshe, they brought the Mishkan to Moshe. The Parsik talks about all the different kalim that were needed that they brought to Moshe. So when it says Eile Pekude, it's also referencing not just the money that they counted, how it was spent, but also the various different kalim that were needed for the counting of all the kelim that were needed for the Mishkan. Now that we're saying that the numbers is not just the money, but it's also the kelim, is verstandig der kishra inyanim. So now we understand the connection, kishra inyan, the connecting, the idea from Pekudei HaMishkan with Avodas HaLevim. The counting of the Mishkan is not the money, it's the kelim, and this has to do with Avodas HaLevim. Behemshech HaPosuk, which the Posuk continues as Pekudei HaMishkan Avodas HaLevim. Avodas HaLevim means taking care of the Mishkan, being in charge, carrying everything else, because this is part of Pekudei HaMishkan, the counting of all the kelim of the Mishkan. While that inyan in Pekudei HaMishkan, because this aspect of counting of the Mishkan, which is not the money that came in from the gifts, but all the different vessels, their minyan hakelim l'chol avedose, counting of all the vessels for the different services that they do, is verbunden mit Avodas HaLevim. That is tied to the service of the Levim. Loses ulahoided ulahakim, to carry, to bring down, and to raise up. Via state in Parshas Nosei, as written in the portion of Nosei, ubeshemes tifkedu as klei mishmeres masois, that you should count by name these vessels that serve which they were guarding, they were carrying. So there was a count and there was a specific uh, uh, number. So that was part of they were carrying. That was Mishmeres Masom. So that Pekudai is part of the Avodas Halavim. They were numbered for their number. The Rebbe says, "Uvi verstandig bepashtus," as simply understood as their minui of Masa HaMishkan, that when they were appointed to carry the Mishkan, or all the Kalim, is koilel them tafkit. That includes the position, the job to help nacheshbon, to keep account von alle Klei HaMishkan, all the vessels of the Mishkan, und Achtung geben, and to make sure, as they sollen alle sein ganzes weiter, they should all be whole, etc. So that's part of the job. The job is so. Therefore, when it says in our pasuk, "Eile Pekudei HaMishkan," that they were. This is the accounting of the vessels of the Mishkan. So then that is becomes the Avodas Halavim, because they were in charge of raising and putting it down, and part of it was also to count it. So that would answer how this fits with Avodas Halavim, the position of loading and unloading, because Pekudei, as Rashi says, includes the Kelim. However, why does Rashi have to say that? This is a doichek to say that the Pekudei means also those countings that were later on. Pashtus Pekudei is referring to the money that was brought in, that they went and or the cases of Nechesha, how they distributed, not about the Kalim, which was later on in the parsha. As bleibt aber nicht move on, it still remains not understood. Was ist Machriach Rashi zu sagen? What forces Rashi to say, as Pekudei HaMishkan, that Pekudei HaMishkan, why does Rashi have to say, is Koilu Tzvei Sugi Minyan, two categories of count? Meint, nicht nor der Cheshbon von Nidvas HaMishkan. It means not just the accounting of the gifts of the Mishkan, the money that came in the cases of Necheshes, nor eich der minyan from kol kelo v'chol avidosim, but it also means, Rashi adds, the number of all the kelim for all the service. And therefore, b'meila to taichin, then we say, as avodas alevim, what does it mean? Not the avodah of counting the money, but avodas alevim is vider inyan is b'shayches mit minu of klei mishkan. That is how the idea, as it connects with the counting of the vessel of the Mishkan, with the appointment of the Klei Mishkan, Losis Lohidet Lohakim Chulu, that means that's the Avodah Salavim, versus saying that Avodah Salavim means that they were in charge for the counting. That's what the bring Vadrab, Lecheditos HaPirush Dochuk. That's not only why does Rashi have to say that, but it is actually difficult. It's a difficult. Warum the Torah is mafsik zwischen the zwei minyonim. The Torah interrupts between the two countings. The counting of the money that came in, the Kesef of Nechesh, and the counting of the different vessels. Ist schwer zu sagen, mit dem Sipur von Asiyas Big Dekuna. The Torah in between inserts the story about making the garments of the Kahuna. Ist schwer zu sagen, so it's difficult to say as Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. Plus, this is the Pekudei HaMishkan, the counting of the Mishkan, but Tzitzich Oich, this would also be referring to an Inyan in the Parashas L'Achrei Achrei, that a part, an idea, something in the Parasha which is after, which means there's a hefsek with the begodim, and then he goes back to counting the kalim. Bald Rashi taich pekudim loshen minyan, since Rashi translates pekudim means counting, hat gedacht lernen kipirush hamefarshim. So he should have learned, as the mefarshim hanal, as avodas halevim biyadi somor. What does it mean, avodas halevim? What is the avodah meant as minyan for nidvas hamishkan? Who was counting the gifts of the Mishkan, Moshe Ibrahim to Levim Yadi Summer. He gave it over to Levim Yadi Summer. So what the Rebbe tries to say, because to connect to the Avodas Halavim, that it means the carrying and the loads that they did in the Midbar the Levim. And the reason Rashi can say that, because Rashi started to say Eile Pekudim is not only the money that they brought in, but also the Kalim that they counted as they brought to Moshe Rabbeinu to stand up to raise the Mishkan. So that's the connection to that was the Avodah. Since we counted them, and part of the counting was to raise the Mishkan. So the Avodah Slavim is talking about their job in the desert to take care of the Mishkan, and not that they were in charge for the how the money was distributed. Why does Rashi say Avodah Slavim? They counted just the money brought in, and the job of the Levim was to count the money. That what he gave over them the job. Why do we have to say a different Avodah Slavim and say that the Nidvas Pekudai Mishkan is talking also about the kid? So we're back to our question: why does Rashi explain Avodah Salavim? What's going on over here? Why can't Rashi not just learn Eile Pekudei HaMishkan? These are the counting of the Mishkan, and B'yadi Somor, B'Avodah Salavim, that the Levim in the summer were in charge of counting, of calculating what is the total of all the different gifts, how it went into the cave. Now the Rebbe also, to bring out the Rebbe's point that the Rebbe is going to answer, the Rebbe asks several more questions in the language of Rashi, which seems to be extra, more than necessary. And this will also give us a hint to what's really going on over here, what's really bothering Rashi. Gimel. Noisef of der Shaila B'siyum Loshen Rashi. So in addition to the question in the end of Rashi's language, V'nimnu kol kelev l'chol avedosei. Why does it have to say, why does Rashi learn that also the kelim that were necessary for the service of the Mishkan were counted? Why does he need to say that? We also have to understand the beginning of this Rashi. Rashi says, "B'parsha zu nimnu kol mishkalei nidvas hamishkan." In this parshas were counted all the weight of the gifts of the Mishkan, lekesef u'lezor, for the silver and the gold, u'lenachoshes and for copper. Seems like to be a lengthy Russian Rashi. Let's compare it to the way that Rashbam writes it. The Teuchel von dem Pirush steht euch in Rashbam. The same idea of the Pirush said in the Rambam, aber dort steht es bekitzer. Over there it says it in a short way. Eile Pekudai. What is it? It says cheshben hakesef v'azov v'necheshes. Pekudai means the cheshben, the accounting of the silver, gold, and copper. Rashi is over Marich Bilshoine, but Rashi has a very long losh. The Rebbe is going to point out. First of all, Rashi says, "Ale beparsha zu nimnuchul." In this parsha were counted. What does Rashi have to say? In this parsha was counted. We're talking about this parsha. When Rashi zogt, Rashi didn't say beparsha zu nimnu. Just minyan mishkole nidvas hamishkan. The number of the weight of the gift of the Mishkan, without saying beparsha zu nimnu. Just saying minyan mishkole, because her statement showing we would already understand as Eile Pekudei that Eile Batzitzich Nitzu Parshas Vayakil, that it does not refer to the portion of Vayakil, because we're saying the Minyan Mishkole Nidvas HaMishkan Vus is Nitokin Cheshben for Nidvas HaMishkan. There is no calculation before, so we know that the Eile isn't talking about these are from before. Nor to Parsha Zu, we already that's self-understood that Parsha Zu Nimnot. So Livos the Hatgosha be Parsha Zu. Why does the Rashi have to say be Parsha Zu Nimno And when it's self-evident that there is nothing about a numbers in the previous parsha, Rashi learns Pekudai means numbers, and the numbers are accounted for in our parsha. Why does that say parsha so? The Forschung seine Mevayer, Forschung explain as wie bald is do a hefsek von etliche psukim, bis the Teure haupt on dem Cheshbon. Since there is an interruption, several verses, until the Torah starts the accounting. So the Riber muss Rashi bewarnen, that's why Rashi has to caution us. As Afo became past the Loshen Eile, it still can see these are, even though Pekudai Mishkan, Bibal der Cheshbon stay beparsha zu, because it's in this parsha, that's why it's Eile, Nimnu beparsha zu. Medarfo befarstein. So the Rebbe is asking, why does Rashi have to ask parsha zu? And the Mefarshim try to answer that because there is an interruption. So, and doesn't start out with the accounting right away. So Rashi has to say, no, Eile, it's still Beparshazu. The Rebbe says, we need to understand, Rashi gedarf zogen Eile Pekudei, Minyan Mishkele Nidus HaMishkel Chula Amur Beparsha, that is said in the Parsha Ki Yotzibay. First, he had to say, this haste, Rebbe says, Frier Abteitchen Eile Pekudei. First, Rashi said what Eile Pekudei means. Minyan Mishkele Chulu means the number of the weight of the der noch zugeben. And then he would add, wo das wird gesagt, be Parsha zu. Where does it say? It's in this Parsha. Instead of Parsha starting off with that. Al derech Pirush Rashi and Reish Parshas told us. It would be similar to Rashi's commentary in the beginning of the portion of Toldus. It says, Ve'ela Toldus Yitzchok. And it says, Yaakov Esav ha'amurim beParsha. So first he says Yitzchok ve'Esav, Yaakov ve'Esav, but then it says Amurim beParsha. Pavos hyped on Rashi, hyped Rashi on beParsha Zunimnuchu. Why does Rashi start Parsha Zunim? That's one question. Is why does Rashi start with that? So previously we asked, why does Rashi have to say B'chlal that this was the counting also includes the counting of the Klei HaMishkan? And now the Rebbe is asking the beginning of Lashon Rashi, why does Rashi have to say Beparsha Zunimnu? If Rashi wants to say that it's here, he should say first, Kol Mishkalem Nidvas HaMishkan, Ha'amurim Beparsha. Beis, also the language itself, Nimnu Kol Mishkalem Nidvas HaMishkan. Were counted all the weights of Nidvas HaMishkan. L'maynav Kiminat Goshazu. Why do we have to advertise? Nimnu, Nidvas HaMishkan. Why the weights of the Mishkan? Noch mehr. Rabbi said, "Megifint achiluk zwischen Targum Onkelos and Targum Yonason." We find a difference between the way Onkelos translates it and the Targum Yonason translates it. In Onkelos state, Ilain Minyone Mashkina. He said, these are the numbers of the Mishkan, of the dwelling place. So he just talks about numbers. He doesn't talk about weights. Aber in Targum Yonason sagt when the Targum says Eile Minyone, the numbers of masculine, mishkaloin, that's the weight, the masculine, the mishkal. Uschumeim, and also the numbers, the amount, the of the base of the mishkan that they build. So he in Targum Yonason adds to the number also the weights, the number to schum, there's also masculine. That means, what do you see? As onkelus, was is nenter zu pshutish mikre, the onkelus, which is closer to the simple meaning, the pasuk yedua. No, han l'shittas Rashi zok nor dem loshen minyan. He only says the language of numbers. Und Rashi kleibt tuis al derech dem loshen von Yonason. Rashi simmers the loshen of Yonason, und his meisiv mishkilei. He says nimnu kol mishkilei. Uliidach is mashmid dem wort uschumein. And he doesn't bring down the total, the schum. So he doesn't say numbers, but he says weights, just the weights. Why would Rashi use more a language that is brought down in Targum Yonis ben Uziel rather than the Lashon in Onkelos? And he actually admits from the Targum Yonis ben Uziel, the Lashon of Schumeim. Rashi just brings kol mishkele, meaning the level of masculine. So, and the Rebbe, so to understand all this, both in the Rashi, the Parsha Zu, and the fact that the Rashi brings the shekel, it's going to lead the Rebbe to the Rebbe's explanation, as we're going to see in Eis Dalet, that Rashi is actually coming to explain to us why does the pasuk say Eila? Usually Eila means this, but not the ones beforehand, as we'll continue to see in this evening. In Ois Dalet, the Rebbe will explain that Rashi already said earlier that the word Eila means these is excluding what it said previously, Posala Sorishonim. But why would this be uh, excluding the previous one? Even if we should say that Eila is referring to the donations, how they distributed it, and the accounting of them. So this is not going on the previous parsha, but it's not excluding the previous parsha. This is just following the nations were given, and now we're telling you how the nations were distributed. Why would the pasuk start saying Ela these, as if what's happening before is excluded? This is something new, but this is a hemshach. Rashi answers this. The Rebbe argues by saying that it's not only talking about the counting of the money, but also, or the gifts in the Hamishkan, but also the counting of the Kalim. The counting of the Kalim explains why this is a new subject. It's Eila, as Rebbe will continue to explain. Oizdal. We can say the explanation here. In Rashi, in his commentary, Rashi is coming to answer a very simple question. The Loshen Eila weist auf Hascholas Inyan. Eila points to a new subject. These. Und noch mehr wie Rashi bringt in Reish Parshas Mishpatim, and even more as Rashi brings down in the beginning of the portion of Mishpatim. Kol mokoim shenemar Eila posela sarishayim. Wherever it says Eila, meaning these, disqualifies the earlier. We're starting a new subject over here. Is nit verstandig, so it's not understood. Even if we're interpreting as Eila Pekudai HaMishkan, that when it says Eila Pekudai HaMishkan, batzit sich nit zu der friedike Sedre, it doesn't refer to the previous Sedre, nor to the Cheshbon HaNedoves, was steht weiter in der Sedre, but rather to the accounting of the gifts that is written later on. The Sedre is as doch fort a hemshach un oisfir hepech from puzzle. It's still a continuation, and it is a conclusion. Still hepech from puzzle, which is not Eila, which means disqualifies the previous. This is still a continuation from the Friedrich Seder. How for the previous Seder? This doesn't fit. The word Eila doesn't seem to fit here. Eila says this is something new, and saying something different than before. This is not different. This is a continuation. Even though we're trying to tell you what is the accounting, but the accounting that follows is not something different, because this follows what we just learned. As noch dem, wie es wird erzählt, wie Eden haben Nadav gewöhnt zu Malachas HaMishkan. After it is related how the Yidden contributed to the work of the Mishkan. And their gifts were used to make the Mishkan. Moshe Rabbeinu, so this is a follow-up. It follows. Moshe Rabbeinu gave a cheshbon to the Yidden. He gave the accounting to the Yidden. Wie viel the Nedavis haben batroffen? How much the gifts How much did it add up? How much did it come out to? Wie sie seinen Ausgenuss geworden, how they were utilized, how did they use the contributions? Stellt sich l'shayla, so the question is, was steht dort der Loschen Eila? Why does it say Eila? Was posel l'sharishanim? Eila means that the previous, no, this is new. We're disqualifying. These are, and not the before, need ve'ela. You should say ve'ela, and these are, because this is the continuation. As Rashi says, if it's Eila, it's posel. Ve'ela is coming to add. So this is adding that after the gifts, they went and they gave the cheshbon of the gift. Und die Shaila bevornt Rashi, this question Rashi answers durch der Hisofa as Pekudai Mishkan. When Rashi adds that when we're counting of the Mishkan, bezieht sich nicht nur zu dem Cheshbon von den Nedovis. Not only does it talk about the number, the accounting of the gifts, nur euch zu minyan kol kelev l'chol avedose, but also to the accounting of all the vessels for all of the work. So since we're also talking about the minyan called Kevu, this is something new. Was the mitvert mevur that explains we parsha zu how in this section, this portion, you start a new subject as it relates to the Mishkan Kidul Kamon, like we'll see later on. So basically, Rashi is coming to answer why does it say Eila, which means this is a new topic, which is really a hemshah. Why doesn't it say Ve'ela? So Rashi says, because the Pekudai is not just talking about the money that they counted, but it's also talking about counting of the Mishkan and the Kalim of the Mishkan, the Chol HaVeidosei. Now we understand how this is a continuation from the previous parsha. Now in Ois Hey, the Rebbe comes up with a phenomenal chiddush over here. That Rashi is actually teaching the Loshen Pekudei not from the Loshen, the number, but Pekudei means appointment. And the Rebbe is going to prove it in the Loshen Rashi. And the Rebbe is later on going to say that with this answers a lot of questions that we have in the Pshat, in the Psukim. The Rebbe said when we talk about Pekudei in the context of a number, then we talk about a total. We're not talking about the counting of it. We talk about the total. The Rebbe brings a proof from the Pasuk. So if Eila Pekudei means these are the totals, so if we're talking about the monies, we have totals over there, the gifts, how much they were brought, there are totals. But when you talk about the Klei HaMishkan, the vessels, there's no totals over there. There's no, I should say there's 10 vessels, 3 vessels, 7 vessels. We're not talking about totals. The idea of counting means the act of counting, not the totals, not to know the numbers. The Rebbe teaches that Pekudei HaMishkan means the number, the counting, and that's a position, an appointment that Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the appointed by Hashem by the Mishkan, and then later on it was the Levim, that they were the appointed to count and to make sure. And this is a difference between the Parsha Vayakel, which talks about the construction, and the Parshas Pekudei, which talks about Eila. Talks about an appointment, which is totally different. Let's look inside. Hey, at first glance, it appears as mit sein Pirush beParsha zu nimnu, that when Rashi teaches in this parsha were counted, kol mishkalei chulu, all the weights of the contributions. Made Rashi zu teach the word Pekudai. Rashi wants to translate the Pekudai means counting. That's what we learned the whole time. Nit als loshin minui, not as an appointment, but not als loshin minyan b'cheshbon. But this is the number and the accounting, the calculation. But the Rebbe says he actually can't translate it that way. So to mean nimnu seems like Rashi wants to say that it's accounting, that it's not an appointment or an accountant. It's a loshen minyan v'cheshbon. But the Rebbe says that doesn't fit. The word pikude as a number means a total. And total doesn't fit when we talk about the Klei HaMishkan. So minyan doesn't mean the counting, but it means total. When there is no total, you can't use the word pikude. So therefore, the word pekude does not mean minyan, but it means appointment. Is this Ober Rashi Alein Shoilo? Rashi rejects this interpretation. Alidei Hamshech Pirushe, by the continuation of his commentary. He says, "V'nimnu kol kelov chulu." So what does it mean? Can't mean over here. Nimnu kol kelov, all the kelim were total. No. Then pekude is loshem minyan. What is pekude when it means counting? Is ein badait, then what it means counting, nit zelungen. We're not talking about, doesn't mean counting ulas haminyan, the act of counting, nor the sachakel diketzon, but it's the total of the number. That is the meaning of pikude. Der bestimmter schum von a minyan. That means the total sum of the accounting, what it comes out of that accounting. This is Muchach. Who says that? It's Muchach in One Parshas Tiso. The beginning of Parshas Tiso, it says, Ki Tiso es roish b'nei Yisrael. When you want to count the b'nei Yisrael, lifkudehem. What does lifkudehem mean? V'Rashi taich ketach betzla kabel schum minyonom lodas kameim. When you wish to get the total of their numbers, to know how much there are. So the Rebbe makes very clearly that the word Pekudeim is not counting. Pekudeim means the total, as we see over there in Parshas Kisi. So Pekudeim means total. Und der Badait from Pekudei, and this meaning of Pekudei total does not fit pasnit of minyan kol kelim l'chol avedose. It doesn't fit on the number of all the vessel avedose. Over there, there is no total over there. As bei die Kelim hat die Teure nicht angegeben, dem Schum Mispar ha Kelim. The Teure did not give us the total and the number of the vessels, how much there were. The Torah is just telling you about the vessels. So what does it mean over there? These are the pikudim. These are the totals. There's no totals there. Nor the pasuk is blois moine minyan. The pasuk is only counting the number zählt beschreibt die kelim. It counts them and describes the vessel, but there is no total there. The Torah, so pekuda can't mean over here with regards to the kelim. So Rashi says pekuda means both. So that means that pekuda can't mean counting number, it means being appointment. Rashi zokt as eile pekuda is b'shayches midibei diminyonim. Rashi says that the eile pekuda is in association with both of these numbers. Whether it is the number of how much they gave for the Mishkan, and also the numbers what they gave for the vessels. So that Rashi therefore makes it very clear what he means by minyan. It doesn't mean total over here, and it doesn't even mean numbers. Erstens, he says, as pikuda v'dor gitaych meloshim in v'tavkid. It doesn't mean numbers. It means appointments, because you can't say totals with regards to Kalim. Rashi says them both. So therefore it means not totals, but it means appointments. Und Beis, and number two, as euch der Minyan von Kol Mishkele Nidvus HaMishkan, that also, what does it mean, the number of the Mishkele and Nidvus HaMishkan? Over there also, it wasn't about the totals. Because that totals doesn't fit by Chol Klavedos. We've been putting them all together. We're not talking about here to see how much they totaled up. That's not what the minyan, the counting of Kol Mishkan Nidus HaMishkan did, is to give us a sum total of what they used it in order to make sure that there was no cheating and that there's nobody took any extra, because it's Punkt the minyan HaKelim, just like counting the Kelim. There was no totals there by counting the Kelim. Meint nit does not mean as er hat abgegeben a cheshbon zum Iden, that he gave a total, a sum von sachhakendiken schum, from the total amount from the nedovis of the gifts. So over here, he didn't give them a total of the gifts. Doesn't mean that. Just like by the Mishkan, he didn't give them the total of how many kelim. How they used it, in order to forewarn, so people shouldn't suspect you. That's not what the minyan did over here, because that's not what the minyan did. Minyan is not a total, so this is not about totals here. But when Rashi is counting here, doesn't mean is the act of counting, not totals over here. Nor blois was is moine v'hoilach. You keep on going. You're counting them. Who counts them? The one who's in charge. Erechont ois, he counts out the mishkole nidvus hamishkan. He counts out the gifts of the weight of the mishkan. Al derech minyan kol kelim chol avedasav, similar to the number, all the kelim, what needed for the work. He also counted out all the gifts that were needed for the kelim that were brought. And that's why Rashi also uses the language of weight, not totals, not schum. Rashi spoke like the Taring Yonis ben Azil and took out the word, the amounts, the totals. My time is Rashi, that's why Rashi is very precise in his language. Nimnu kol mishkile nidvas hamishkan. They counted the weights of the gifts of the Mishkan. Because Rashi Beferish doesn't want to tell you about the sums of it, or not the total similar. The meat will Rashi noch mehr klar machen. Rashi wants to make it even more clear. We're not talking about here to give you a total of the number. Schum as the Yonis ben Azil said, no, only mishkilei, only the weight. Nor the Torah rechen blois ois the mishkolim. The Torah just gives you the weights from the nedovis, lekesel, zov, and the cheshes, which each one, how many it was the weights, but not to know the totals. So why did they count it? They didn't know the totals. And the tzvek from the minyan, and the purpose, why did they count this? Is al derech v'dei minyan haket mechol avedose. Is similar to counting all the kelim for their work. V'hainu. As beide minyonim, that is, that both of these countings are verbunden mit Pekudai. They're both associated with appointments, mit tafkid hamemuna, with the job of the one who is appointment. An appointed person takes care of the weights, everything that came in, takes care of all the vessels, this is not about knowing a number and not about making sure that there is no suspicion that mishandling of any of the money. No, it's just the job of a person appointed. Punkt wie der minyan hakelim is gven b'shaychus. Just as counting the vessels was in connection. Mit dem was die Eden haben gebracht, dem Mishkan b'chol kelov zu Moshe. That had associated, they brought the Mishkan, all of its kelim to Moshe. So Moshe basically inspected that everything was done properly. That he should see, he should determine, as his they were done properly, etc. With the Pasuk is dort Messiah, the Pasuk actually says, what did Moshe Vayar Moshe's kolam locha vina oiso vine osu oiso kasher tziva Hashem. The Pasuk says, concludes that Moshe saw all of the job and they did it as Hashem has commanded. So that was the uh, confirmation that they brought it to Moshe to confirm that everything's okay. Und der Fahr werden ausgerechnet beprotius alle Kelim. And that's why all the vessels are counted specifically. This is their Seder when the Memuna darf bashtetikun. That is the order when the one appointed needs to confirm, as alle kelim uprotim, that all the vessels, all the details, seine viful medarf, as they need to be, ubershleim musamen complete. That was the purpose and that was the goal when they counted the kelim. Similarly, is when they counted the money that was brought in. Al derech zeh is their teuchen. Similarly, is the idea from Oisrechen and the Mishkele Nidvus HaMishkan, that we counted the weight of the Nidvus HaMishkan as Moshe Zaindik der Memuna Bal Havais, being that Moshe was the one appointed and he was in charge. Von Mishkan of the Mishkan had gehalten Cheshbon. He was holding on to the counting from the Mishkan and Nidvus HaMishkan, from the weight of Nidvus HaMishkan, not to give us the totals, but just to know what's going on. Midna Davis and the Kalim, this is all Moshe as an appointed person. So the Rebbe basically says that Rashi is not talking about numbers, not totals. We're talking about an appointed person who is Moshe Rabbeinu. He was in charge. First, seeing as later on the pasuk that all the kelim were properly, he was in charge that all the money that was given there was there properly, and that is the idea of Pekudai. The Rebbe proves that Pekudai doesn't mean just counting; it means some totals. It means totals, and over here this doesn't apply totals, so it must mean that this is Pekudai doesn't mean totals, means therefore appointments, and the appointments were given to those who are in charge. And now we also understand that Rebbe is going to explain how this is Eila. This is different than the previous Parsha. Parsha's Pekudei is Eila is different than the previous Parsha of Vayakil. Und das ist der Chiddush be Parsha Zu Oizvav legabe Parsha Vayakil. This is the novelty in this Parsha relative to Vayakil. In Parshas Vayakil is the ganze Teuchen Hadvorim, the portion of Vayakil, the entire content of the matters, about preparing to build the Mishkan, about the making of the Mishkan. Früher, wegen Nidvus HaMishkan, to prepare for the Mishkan, there were the gifts of the Mishkan. And then later on, as we bezahlen v'aliv chulu, how bezahlen v'aliv haben gemacht the Mishkan v'kelev, how they actually made, they constructed the Mishkan and the Kelev. It's talking about preparing for the doing and they actually making it. That now is talking about inspection. Now we're talking about the appointed to make sure everything is proper. Aber in unser Parsha, that's wegen Pekudei HaMishkan. We're talking about the appointments of the Mishkan, wegen the Minuyim und Tefkidim, about the appointments and the jobs von wie welche seine Memunim auf Mishkan, for those that are appointed of the Mishkan. We're talking now the tasks, not talking about the job, but the Mishkan, we're talking about the tasks. Wo zet men the Parsha zu an Inyan for Minui of Mishkan? So where do we see in our Parsha the idea of appointment for the Mishkan, the appointed to do? So Rashi says, when you count, that makes you an appointment. That gives you that appointment. Sagt Rashi, beparshe zu nimnu kol mishkele nitvas hamishkan v'chulu, v'nimnu kol kev l'chol v'dosav. In our parsha, they counted all the mishkele of the gifts of the mishkan, and all the kelim for all the, whatever they needed for all the work. That's the appointment. Was das is der tafkid von amemuna. That's the position. That's the job of a person who is an appointment. To keep accounting of all the details. So that is not Pekudai numbers, but Pekudai appointments, and they were appointed, and the one who was appointed keeps track of the gifts, keeps track of the Mishkan. In order to make it even clearer, this is the novelty of this parsha. This is Eila, different than the Vayakil. That here we're discussing the appointments of the Mishkan. Is the Pasuk Mamshich, the Pasuk continues, Asher Pukad al Pi Goimer, Avodas Halevim Biyadi Somer Goimer. So Rashi explains, what does it mean, the Avodas Halevim? That's the second part in the Rashi. But Rashi is the Reif Mefarish, Pekuda Mishkan Vikelov, Hi Avoda HaMesura Lelevim B'midbar Losi V'chulu. That the Pekudim, the appointments of the Mishkan Vakela was given over to the Levim and the Midbar to carry. At that point, it was Moshe Rabbeinu's job, Pokad Api Moshe. But later on, they brought it to Moshe, but this was given to the Yadi Somer. Rashi is the Mitmefarish, the Mehemshach HaKosov. Rashi explains the continuation of the pasuk. As odd that in Mishkan, this idea of the appointments for the Mishkan, that in Mishkan, the idea, the concept of appointment for the Mishkan matters, was Be'esas, he is Mishkan, when they made the Mishkan, is Pukadapi Moshe. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's job. That was his appointment. Is La'achra Komis HaMishkan, after the Mishkan was raised, that work was given over to the Levim. Kimesuper in Parshas Nosei Barucha, as explained in the portion of Nosei at length. As the Levim seine Memuna Finyon HaMishkan, that the Levim are appointed for the matters of the Mishkan. It's all about appointment. The appointment consists of the making sure the money that comes in, making sure that the kelim that come in, and that's their appointment. But this is not a subtotal here because it doesn't fit for the Mishkan. This is Eila, this is something total different. Now, with this concept over here that we're not trying to say the total, this answers us a whole bunch of questions. The Rebbe comes up and he tells us, that this is the appointment, and the appointment that Rashi explained in this parsha is Eila, is a separate appointment. We're not talking about building, but preparing the Mishkan. We're talking about the appointments. The appointment of the Mishkan is to make sure that everything is done. That's the tasks. Moshe Rabbeinu did it then, and this was going to be given over Biyad Isoma Alvim later on. And this answers us a bunch of questions, because if we're trying to tell us totals over here, a lot of things, we have a lot of problems here that we're going to go through. According to this explanation, there's other surprises that we have in this parsha. B'negeya dem cheshbon from the nidves hamishkan, when you take the accounting of the gifts of the Mishkan from unser sedre, is farana shakla v'tarya. There is a give and take. There's a debate. Many commentators, there's a lot of issues here, and all these issues are answered with this presentation of the Rebbe, that we're not talking about totals over here. Aleph, the Torah that zählt nor was mit getan mit dem Kesef and the Torah only relates to us what they did with the silver and the copper, aber nicht was mit getan mit dem Zoll. Doesn't say what they used the gold for. Steht nor wie viel Zoll is given. It just says that it was how much gold it was. But if we're giving a total, what happened to the gold? How come it doesn't say? But now we know it doesn't say, because we're not giving the total. As the Rebbe will explain why by gold they didn't need to count that base. I feel when he gave to Kesef, even the amount that we do know about Kesef, we don't know all the Kesef. We don't know the Kesef that the people brought. The Torah only gives a cheshbon for the Kesef that each one had to give a half a shekel, how that was used. But the gift Kesef, we don't have an accounting. Even as it relates to the Kesef, to the silver, is there cheshbon given nor from Kesef Pekudai. That was only the silver, the half a shekel that came from counting of the community. But everybody had to give half a shekel, which is the Trumas Ha'adonim, the separation to make the sockets for the Mishkan. She's open talking cheshbon bivul kesef, but we don't have an accounting how much silver she's arangikumen als nitves hamishkan that came in as gifts for the Mishkan. Or kumefurish bepirush Rashi, as Rashi says it very clearly. Asunum klolus hakesef was mat gegeben benedova, that from the general silver that was given as a benevolence, as a gift, but the gemacht klolus hakleshoris. That's how the general serving vessels were made out of. So we see what happened with them. We only know about these silver sockets that we have a cheshbon. What happened with the cheshbon? If we need to know a cheshbon, why don't we have a cheshbon from the kesef that the people brought as a gift? In Gimel, number 3, chutz the nidovis for zover kesef and cheshev. Outside of silver, copper, as gold, silver, and copper, there were additional 10 other types that they brought that they gifted for the separation of Mishkan. The Pasuk says, where those accounted for? But you find it in Pasuk, and we don't find in the verse as Moshe had given a cheshbon for Yen and Nedav, that Moshe gave an accounting for those gifts. And number 4, it says in Pasuk state, as mod gebracht Nedavis le Mishkan, bis is given v'hoised. But so much gift, it was left over. But gebracht mer before mod gedacht. They brought more than they needed. When es is nicht gemacht geworden a cheshbon from the Heiser, we didn't make a cheshbon from the extra. So we have a lot of things that we don't know what happened. What's the total? What happened with the gold? What happened with the other silver besides that they made the sockets from? That's accounted for, but not the rest of the kesef. What happened to the other types, the other 10 kinds that they brought? And what happened to the extras? So the Rebbe said, "Benegay the letzte drei shaylas lernt as it relates to the last 3 questions, the way we learn, we answer as Moshe gegeben a cheshbon nor from the Sachen was gehat a größere chshivas. He only gave an accounting from things that were very important. Aber nicht von die welche seien nicht given as a tire and choshev, not things that weren't so expensive and so important. So we just didn't have to give a cheshbon for that. Well, derech zeh is der schum ha-kesef and nidus ha-mishkan. Also similar, we can say the amount of silver, the gifts for the Mishkan, nit given ke größer, wasn't a large one. Und der v'hoiser nit given ke der choshev. And this extra was not something important. So basically saying, since it wasn't of such great value, it wasn't important to give a cheshbon for that. That was okay without a cheshbon. But that's not the way of a gabbai tzedakah. How would Moshe Rabbeinu not give a full accounting, even from things that are not as valuable? But das is nit kein tirutz maspik. I mean, but this only answers the last 3, doesn't answer about the gold. But even that, the Rebbe doesn't accept, because how could you say that a gabbai like Moshe would not give an accounting for everything he took in? But this is not a sufficient answer. If the reason why they were counted and there was a total is that an attendant, a charge of tzedakah, needs to give an accounting for the kasper tzedakah from the monies of charity in order to protect him from suspicion. Maybe he misused the funds, maybe he didn't pass it along. Darf es sein, sei wenn es handelt sich wegen einer Größen, then it must take place whether it's a big amount or the nicht a Größen or not such a big amount. Can't say a small amount, it's okay for him to be suspected though. Mitzad v'yisim nikim Hashem u'bnei Yisrael. Verse says you need to become clean from Hashem and those of the Yidden. They should not suspect you. Darf en abgeben a full when you must present the full detailed accounting. I'll call upon him bis zu ein shekel, up to 1 shekel, all the way to 1 shekel. Okay, less than a shekel, no, but up to a shekel. So why don't we find all those things accounted for? About so is kosher, so this is the case, so it's hard, it's difficult. Wie kommt es? As Rashi verantwortlich nicht die Shailus now. Why does Rashi not answer these questions? Seem to be a lot of strong questions. The Shailas and in Pshutis al Mikra, these are simple, simple literal level of learning the Pasik. So you see, as Kama Beforshim Parenturunze, that many commentators answer them. Everybody have different answers. Everybody in all their way. And Rashi just ignores these questions. What about it? But we explained before, the Rebbe explained that this wasn't an accounting b'chal. So the questions are don't start from the beginning. According to Rashi, there's not even a question at the beginning. The numbers in this parsha is the Torah nitoisen zu sagen. The Torah is not out to tell us here, as Moshe hat abgegeben, that Moshe presented a protestige cheshbon, that he gave a detailed accounting from all the nedovis, from all the gifts hamishkan. Nor as those seinen minyonim, these were numbers, was Moshe als memuna from Mishkan, being that he was in charge of the Mishkan, he was counting them, hat durchgeführt, durch die zu halten cheshbon von nedos. He, in order to keep track of the donations, he kept them. Und auf zu losen wissen, Dominion. It wasn't a Torah. This is not a Torah. Just to tell us, it doesn't. We don't have to give it everybody to teach us this idea that he was in charge and he was overall supervising. So he's giving a Beispiel. The pasuk is giving you just an example, a sample. For instance, in the silver, in the gold, in the copper, so those things that the Torah mentions it. The minyan for the Ikedik and the Dovis, the main from the main gifts, the Kesef, Ulazov and the Cheshas for the gold and the silver and the copper. The Rebbe references the note 29 because which the Rebbe earlier Zov, Kes and the Cheshas are Mishkol, but that's in the footnote over here. Und the Vater is euch kein kasha, so those are general, but they didn't give a detailed cheshbon for the Zohar. The Rebbe explains that he didn't give a detailed counting what they did with the gold. Weil the kavona is done need der cheshbon was mod giton mit the nedovis, because the intent here is not the accounting what you did with these gifts, and how you utilize them. That's not what the purpose is here. So that to remove yourself from suspicion, so nobody should suspect you. Those was the Torah is mefaret was mod genutzt in the dovis. So why does the Torah tell you what they use them? That's only by the way, but we're really just telling that we count a sample. Nor virashi is medayik b'l'shoyne nimnu kol mishkilei nidvas hamishkan. That the minion of the weight of the nidvas hamishkan, the minion of the weight that says in the parsha eile pekudai those, while in them vashtei der tafkid hamemuna. That's his appointment, is to assure, to counting the mishkoli the nidvus hamishkan. I guess the gold is not gonna be is not by the weight, but the mishkolim of the kesef that was weight was by the weight of it. That was the job of the memuna. And the far is nitokin hechrech, and that's why there's no need. We're not forced to be mela maikman oisrech, and that's why we try to not count the meribu aprotiv all the details. Was mod giton mitten zov. Not that we did with the gold. I feel it with the chagav nedovis, as by the other contributions, because basically it seems that there was a lot of the gold went in a lot of different way, different deal. But we're not here to tell you the details how it was utilized. So therefore, if it would tell you by the gold, you'd have to go through many details. So therefore, the pasuk doesn't talk about the gold; it just talks about the weight of the silver. This was the shekel that each one gave a machzis a shekel, and this is just a sample. And but technically, Moshe Rabbeinu, as an appointed, he looked over everything, but not for the purpose of totals, but for the purpose of just being keeping track and mind what it goes and what was coming in, and uh, the pos that was the pos that was his appointment, and that's the way Rashi learns. And the Rebbe concludes now with the Yener Shel Torah. Ches von Yener Shel Torah beperish Rashi. The one Torah with the one freer diuk loshon Rashi nimnu kol mishkele nitvas hamishkal. Rashi's specific language, they counted the weight of the Nitzah Mishkal. As Moshe Domeinu given the Mishkal, he counted the weights. So he's not the Shavius. We don't care about the value for the Mzov Kesef and the Choshes of the solvent. Nor blows the Mishkal, but only the weight. The weight was what is important. The Chilik Tzvisha Mishkal Shavius, the difference between weight and value is Mishkal is nor der Chomer Hadover V'Kamusei. Mishkal weight is merely the material of the matter and the quantity. Mashenkin the shavius for Nazach, the value of a matter, is verbunden mit your chashivas. That's associated with its important. Your echos, its quality, your tzura, its shape. Weight is quantity, it's the material. Value is quality, importance is the shape. What does this mean in service of Hashem? What is this in the service of Hashem? Yid makes a dwelling place for Hashem blessed. Durch dem was is mekayim mitzvahs, when he fulfills mitzvahs. Tut in yon von Yiddishkeit bechlal, if he is involved in matters of Yiddishkeit in generally. So we have value and we have weight. Seine voran die zwei Yonim. The etzem asiyah, the doing, the mishkal, that's the weight. Und the kavonas mitzvah. Then you have the intent of the mitzvah, the shavius from the asiyah, the value of the doing. Ir toichem mitzvah, the contents, the shape of it. Kemen meinen, so one could think, al b'shas ha'id git up to meibers to nor an asiyah gashmis. One presents to Hashem only a physical act, on kena kavonas, without any intentions. It just has the weight, it doesn't have any value. He passed to Zogen as the mitkemen oitboina mishkan leisborach. How does it fit to say that you're going to build a mishkan for Hashem just with doing a gashmis dike doing? I've done bevorntment. That's why we're cautioning you. As the mishkele nidves ha-mishkan, that these weights of nidves ha-mishkan, the actual, just the way the kamos, the materials, einen pukad al pi Moshe, they were counted, instructed by Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu legt sich herein. Moshe Rabbeinu invests himself on his pocket, and he instructs. Euch die Mishkal is also the weight, was ihnen geben, the weight that they give. Was das Gufa macht sei roi zu werden a chelik von the Mishkan Leisbarach. That itself makes them worthy of being a chelik of the Mishkan, because the weight itself, Moshe Rabbeinu is pocket of them. He commands on them, and that gives them the value. Bis as the matbeya was ihnen geben. Thereby, to the extent that the coin that didn't give, Verta Matbeya Shalesh, becomes a coin of fire, as the Rebbe explained in the last week's Sikha that we learned in the project in the Kute Sikhas, Durginoma mit Eish HaNeshama, that it is penetrated with the fire of the soul. You build the physical Mishkan, the individual Mishkan completely. It becomes fire. It becomes with the Kavanah, even though it's only a Matbeya Gashmis. It becomes a Matbeya Shalesh, the fire itself. It is Magdim Zoicha That's where you introduce and you marriage the Binya Beis Hamikdash Hakloli to the building of the general Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, very spilled in our days. So the Rebbe basically switches it around. First of all, in Yonei, in the Yena Shel Torah, the Rebbe explains how Mishkal, which is the weight, it's the quantity of the material that's invested by Moshe Rabbeinu Pukat Moshe. You built a Mishkal, don't need the Kavanah Dafke, but it's the actual act of Torah mitzvahs, and Moshe Rabbeinu commands them, and he invests himself in it. But that really becomes a matbei shalish, penetrate the Eish of the neshama. And the Rebbe learns taka that Rashi, even the Rashi is minyan, but it doesn't mean nimnu. It actually means an appointment. And as an appointed person, he counted them all the vessel of the Mishkan. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Pekudai Tovshin Chafhei.